podcast just in case something goes wrong in the beginning. Like I leave the volume on for my YouTube or something silly like that.
Sure.
Have you met, not to keep talking about work, because I'm sure you don't want to talk about work all day, but I love the Dave Damashek bits that he does. Like they're hilarious. Have you met him yet? Have you had a chance to talk to him yet?
Oh, Dave? Yeah.
Goes wrong. Like I leave the. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on Dave's show, like his podcast all the time. We're on the fantasy show on NFL Network together. So yeah, Dave's great. He's been really the one that's kind of pushed me up. Like he got us that spot on the network show. So that he's the man. I love Dave.
Nice.
He's good people.
Yeah, good insurgence of young people on NFL Network lately between Good Morning Football and Fantasy and Friends and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's been fun. I mean, like I definitely think, especially the Fantasy and Friends is like wants to get a kind of a different audience than just, and there's a big like bit between the people here, like yeah. But Fantasy and Friends is the fun fantasy show, and like that gets people going and everything. So and now that I'm on it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's the fun show, of course.
If you couldn't tell, I'm a big NFL Network watcher. What's ESPN? I have no idea. Haven't watched it in forever.
Oh, good man. Yeah, me neither. I don't watch that network thing. I only watch the NFL Network for sure. No, don't tell anybody else otherwise.
Yeah, I wouldn't because I don't know. All right, let's. I'm gonna go ahead and start the podcast here, and everybody has the topics, every show notes, and everything.
Yep.
Yada yada. So the first, 6 bullet points I'm just reading through? Kev, is that how you set it up there? Looks that way.
Yeah, I don't think they're huge talking points.
No, it doesn't seem that way. Okay. All right. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fantasy Authority Podcast, brought to you by thefantasyauthority.com. This is episode number 69 here, and we are heading into week 10 of the NFL season already, which is crazy. We're in double digits. Unbelievable. I don't like it, but I also do like it because, it's starting to get hot in the fantasy world, especially. Teams are starting to freak out. Players are starting to freak out. It's getting good. It's getting competitive. I, of course, am your host, Anthony Pinzone. Alongside me today, I have Kevin Steele, and welcoming back to the show, you may have seen him on NFL Network lately. He's been all over the place. Matt Harmon, how you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing great, guys. Thank you so much for having me tonight. It's a nice little reprieve from everything else that's going on out there in the world. But yeah, thanks so much for having me back. I always enjoy my time talking to you fellas.
Absolutely, man. We enjoy having you. As you alluded to, it, of course, is Election Day here as we record this episode. A lot of talk going on about the election, but we're not going to get into that because that's just not what we want to do here. Kev, how you doing, man?
Not bad. Just, a little break from all the election talk to talk to fantasy football, so I'm down.
Not only fantasy football, guys. Today we're actually talking fantasy playoffs. I can't believe we're talking fantasy playoffs, honestly, but they are only 4 weeks away for some leagues, 5 weeks for standard leagues. So it is time to get ready, start looking for guys who have an easy schedule come weeks 14, 15, and 16. Why do we talk about them now? Well, because the trade deadlines are coming, of course. Trade deadlines within the next week or two for most leagues. So if you're going to go out and get a guy for your playoff push, you need to get him now. We will get into that towards the end of the show. Of course, we have our biggest news heading into week 10. We're going to have some streaming options for you, as well as our best of the rest. So, guys, without further ado, why don't we get into the news here? Ryan Fitzpatrick sprains his MCL and is considered day to day. If he can't go, Bryce Petty will start. Little selfless plug here. My Finns beat the Jets this weekend. That was huge. Love it. We've won 3 straight, by the way. Feeling good. Case Keenum remains the starter for LA. I can't believe that's still a thing. Derrick Henry got hurt before the game this past weekend, which is probably extremely disappointing to people who were queuing him up, expecting a bigger workload. Luckily, I was paying attention, got him out of that lineup just in time. If you guys remember last week, Dirk Cutter said he was hopeful that Doug Martin would return for Week 10. Yet he did not practice on Monday. Not looking good for Doug Martin to return. Those hamstring issues, man, they're brutal. Alex Smith, Kansas City Chiefs, he's expected to return this week after 2 straight weeks of Nick Foles action. I'm sure Chiefs fans are ready for Smith to come back. Spencer Ware also still in concussion protocol. Now, some of the bigger bits of news, in case you didn't think that was very big. Melvin Gordon erupts for 196 yards rushing, 65 yards receiving, and a touchdown. Holy crap, man. So before this week, we were, us and I'm sure fantasy shows across the web, we're talking about how Melvin Gordon is very touchdown dependent. He hasn't really had that game where he kind of explodes for huge yardage, puts up a monster RB1 performance, is this the guy that you should sell sort of topics and things like that? And he comes in and goes for, 260 yards and a touchdown. Is he still a sell candidate?
I mean, I don't think so. I think he's cooking right now. He's getting better as the season goes along. And, I mean, talk about a turnaround from what was really a disappointing rookie season, not just in the touchdown department, but also just, in general, just playing better, just breaking tackles better, also getting some improved holes from the offensive line. And let's be frank, too, a lot of it is volume, and volume is king in fantasy football. Like, if Danny Woodhead doesn't get hurt early in the season, Melvin Gordon's probably not having this year, but that is what happened. And because of that, he's been pretty much a workhorse back for the Chargers, and I expect him to be going forward. It's a good offense. He's got a ton of playing time just locked in there. So there's really no reason that Melvin Gordon's situation should change. And I think that is – I mean, he's a top 5 running back to me probably the rest of the way.
It seems Kevin would agree with the head nod on a podcast, Kevin.
I pretty much covered everything that I would have said. So, but yeah, I mean, I think when we all headed into this season, well, I mean, you got out Melvin Gordon as like the 6th, 7th round pick. Plenty of analysts really touted him this offseason. Really was a guy sort of similar to what Doug Martin was last year. Obviously, different situations, but sort of the same mold of what we thought would happen. And he really has, I mean, outplayed, I think, most everybody's expectations to this point. And then he has this game for fantasy owners. And I mean, I've had him everywhere in DFS this weekend as well. So I don't know, like, I don't think this is going to stop. There's nobody else there unless you're a fan of Kenneth Farrow that's going to, eat into his workload at all. So I really like Melvin Gordon. And I think, I think it bodes well for future if they can really improve the offensive line, because clearly they don't have one of the best offensive lines in the league, and they still needs a ton of work. And if that can be improved, I think we're talking about Melvin Gordon potentially, as a viable RB1 for years to come.
I agree, man. How about that explosion, too, from year 1 to year 2? We've almost seen kind of the opposite out of Todd Gurley, right? Because last year the conversation was Todd Gurley, Melvin Gordon, which rookie's going to be better? Which one should you take first, especially in dynasty leagues? That was a huge topic of conversation. Redraft Gordon was very under the radar, I think, in comparison to Gurley. And this year, Melvin Gordon absolutely tearing it up, just going on a rampage right now. Touchdowns every single week, huge plays. I mean, this guy looks legit. Not that Todd Gurley's been a bad runner, but the team around him is absolutely falling apart, which is leading to pretty lackluster performance for a guy who was a high first-round pick for most people this year. So how the tables have turned in just a short season. On the other end of the spectrum, though, talking about running backs who have not been performing, how about Ryan Matthews in Philadelphia? 8 snaps this week. I think he got a touchdown, too, in those 8 snaps, amazingly enough. But only 8 snaps for Ryan Matthews. Darren Sproles clearly the bell cow, in quotes there, for Philadelphia. Hasn't worked out too well for them. They're 4-4 after starting 3-0. So I don't know why you would stick to this if it's not working. But what do we make of this situation here in Philly?
I mean, it's pretty weird, right? Like, they have Darren Sproles as the feature back. as you said, very aptly in quotation marks. I mean, he plays a ton of snaps. He gets a pretty decent amount of work, but they don't really use Ryan Matthews at all anymore. 8 snaps this last week. That's been a trend pretty much over the last month, and even going back into the early parts of the season, there were plenty of weeks we just didn't get work outside of the red zone, which is great. Like, he seems to be a touchdown threat every single week. So if you need like a desperation running back play, and pretty much, I mean, who doesn't need a desperation running back play this season, especially during the bye weeks with 6 teams and more going on, or 6 teams going on bye the last 2 weeks. So, I mean, he's been helpful for that reason. He would be certainly a guy that I don't think you can get somebody to bite on him just from his fantasy point totals because of the touchdowns. But if you can use him as like a little bit of like a salt and pepper topping on a trade, you know, maybe that last piece to send it over the top, I certainly think that's a worthwhile equation because, you know, for whatever reason, whether it's health or just they don't like him very much as a player, the Eagles don't seem to want to use him as a feature back.
And it is surprising because, I mean, obviously Darren Sproles, I mean, doesn't profile as a lead back whatsoever. So, I mean, he's been productive to this point. I don't know how long he can sustain the level of productivity, at least as a runner. But Ryan, I really do. You mentioned the injury, but I wonder, honestly, if there is something more that we don't know about with Ryan Matthews, because this doesn't make any sense. I mean, we've seen him be productive, and his workload has just gone down each and every week. His snap share just continues to dwindle down. And I mean, the last 2 weeks prior to this, Doug Peterson came out and said that he's still the lead back. And it was kind of like, come on, bro, you're not going to keep fooling us. We know he's not. Like, just go ahead and say it. And he finally this week he said that Darren Sproles is the lead back, which just sounds weird to say because he just is not the type of player that you think of as a profile lead back there in that offense. So I don't know. I don't even know what to do with Ryan Matthews at this point because I feel like in this landscape of in terms of running backs that isn't super deep, I don't know if you can just straight drop the guy. I guess it depends on what's available, but it's also kind of like, well, do you just, especially in a league where maybe you don't have a huge, a surplus of bench spots, maybe it is, a wise move to move on from him, but then you always feel like the week that you drop him is the week that the next week he's going to go off, probably like, maybe fantasy owners have thought about with like Russell Wilson, and then we kind of saw how that worked out. Obviously, completely different. But I just think that it's kind of tough with guys like that because it's always the ceiling is still there, but obviously his floor is at as far down as you can get it.
Yeah, and like you said, though, there's how much is there to really pick up at the running back position right now? It is slim pickings for sure. We talked about this a couple of podcast episodes ago too. It's a flip flop with the receivers. This year, I don't know where I was going to go with that. I'm going to just cut that. Yeah, no idea where I was going with that, so I'm going to cut that piece. Yeah, like you said, it's slim pickings at the running back position as well. So maybe you don't drop him. Maybe you just kind of wait for him to, get a revitalization from Philadelphia. Maybe Darren Sproles goes down with an injury. I don't know. But at this point, there's very little out there I would drop him for. How about this Broncos offense? Trevor Siemian had them running really well at the beginning of the season. Siemian goes down and Lynch has to come in for a game. Or maybe 2. I don't remember. But that short amount of time, Siemian comes back, and now this offense seems to be completely different. They seem to be struggling. The 30-20 loss here on Sunday night to Oakland, which that was kind of Oakland's proving game right there. It's kind of the first big competition that they've beaten this year on their way to a 7-2 record. So good job by them. But is there concern for this Broncos offense? Should you be trying to sell your Broncos stock at this point?
Well, I mean, I don't think at this point, like I've mentioned before, I don't think it's ever a smart move to sell anybody that's at their lowest value because you're not getting much on you're not going to get much back in return for them. I mean, outside of as even Demaryius Thomas or Emmanuel Sanders, who the last few weeks have really struggled, haven't really been, anything that you would have thought they would be. So I don't know if you can really get anything for them. And now you have with Devontae Booker, Capri Bibbs now, all of a sudden, seemingly could be more involved in that offense, taking carries away from him. So I don't know what you can really get for any of those pieces because I just don't think you're going to be able to get enough to in return to make it a smart move. But
yeah, I think the big question is in the backfield. Not only just what is Capri Bibbs going to be going forward? Is he going to eat a ton into Devontae Booker's workload? But, I mean, are they going to be able to sustain a running game? Because this is an offense that needs to have that as the engine of the attack. Like Trevor Siemian is not a guy that's going to be able to carry you week in and week out. The good thing about the passing game is it's so predictable. It's one of the most highly concentrated offenses in the NFL. I mean, Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas are pretty much threats for 7 to 12 targets every single week because they don't really have a number 3 receiver. Virgil Green is kind of a fringe tight end starter that they use sparingly. They throw to the running backs a little bit, but typically it's just these top 2 receivers eating. And, I mean, that gives those guys weekly floors that are really enticing, but if this offense as a whole is going to hit its ceiling, either Booker or Bibbs needs to step up as the lead back. And Mike Kliss, who's one of the best beat reporters out there, I would say like a top 5 guy among guys that cover any team in the NFL. He's been there forever covering that team. He was the one that tweeted out that it could be a situation where Booker loses the starting job to Capri Bibbs as soon as this week against New Orleans. And, I mean, I think that puts both of these guys on the starting radar against the Saints, who just pretty much give it up to everybody. So I think the key to this offense is going to be the running game.
Yeah. Will the Broncos' backup running back please stand up? Because that's been the guy who's getting the yards and getting the points lately. Unbelievable. Speaking of a guy who's getting yards and getting points, my boys Michael Thomas in New Orleans, those Saints you just spoke of, Matt. He is lighting it up. Another huge game, 5 catches, 73 yards, 2 touchdowns. I tried my hardest to get this guy in every league I'm in at the beginning of this year. I just thought his situation was the best out of the young receivers. He's got Drew Brees. He's got a high-profile offense. They pass the ball 50 times a game. What more could you want? Is he now the Saints' best wide receiver? At least he's producing the best currently.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on this one. Yes, he is the best Saints receiver. I believe you guys had me on during draft time. We talked about receivers then. He was a guy I really liked as a top 5 receiver in this draft class. He's a guy that profiled very similar to me to, a Michael Crabtree type, a really good, strong, disciplined possession receiver. That's pretty much who he's been through his first few weeks. I mean, from weeks 3 to this point, he only had 1 game under 70 yards. Or either one game where he didn't have either 70 yards and or a touchdown, and that was the week prior to this one when I believe he had 6 for 63. So, I mean, at this point, like, he's a guy that is going to be the most consistent player in the offense, and that's key for these Saints receivers because Marcus Grant, my colleague here, often calls it wide receiver roulette there in New Orleans. Somebody's eating. We don't always know who it's going to be. Brandon Cooks, I think, is a nice player, but he's somebody I've been saying for years is more of like the Deshaun Jackson mold than, the Antonio Brown, T.Y. Hilton mold. He's just not that disciplined of a route runner against press coverage. So whereas he fails to be their number 1 receiver, I think Michael Thomas really is that guy that can be the complete player. And, oh, by the way, we'd seen him do a lot of short route running possession sort of role playing on those short slant drag routes out of the wide formation. This week we saw him against the 49ers. Of course, that's the caveat, but we saw him get downfield more. We saw him make more plays down the field. And if he's going to be more explosive like that, then he becomes a potential, wide receiver 1 for fantasy the rest of the way.
I couldn't agree more with what you just said. It's kind of funny because in the, during the offseason and stuff, there was talk of bad Michael Thomas. Is that what people try to call him? I don't know. But clearly that was a bad take there with that one. But I've been surprised. I really liked him heading into the season. But, I mean, I don't think that I thought – or I didn't see this level of production that he's been able to put up on a week-to-week basis coming from him. I've been surprised. I mean, he really has been the best rookie outside of, of all the rookies outside of Ezekiel Elliott, in my opinion. Well, I guess we could also add Dak Prescott into that as well from what he's been able to do. But I just, whenever we would talk about wide receivers, I just didn't think that we'd be talking about Michael Thomas as being the best, at least year 1, as he's been. Because, I mean, I think a lot of people thought that Sterling Shepard or Corey Coleman would be that guy that we would be talking about, and we just really haven't. I mean, obviously the Giants offense has struggled outside of this past week, and then Corey Coleman obviously broke his hand and hasn't really been available up until this past week. So I don't know. Like, I'm very intrigued by his long-term outlook, I guess, if you will. And like you said, like, I think moving forward, you have to view him as, at the very least, a solid wide receiver 2 on a week-to-week basis.
For sure. Man, he's good. That Saints offense is just so good. If they had a defense, it'd be a good team. But they don't have a defense. The only defense worse than their defense is San Francisco. I mean, I don't even know if San Francisco puts people on the field anymore. It's pretty much like you go out there, you throw a pass, you score. Okay, San Francisco's offense is coming out.
And David Johnson gets to face that defense this week. So,
I'm pretty sure. You know that's just going to be one of those games, though, where, like, it all makes too much sense. You know, I don't like, this is not real analysis. This is just total conjecture and, like, half joking, but half, like, it's just the way fantasy goes. So who would really be surprised if it happened? You know, David Johnson's basically the best running back in the NFL. The 49ers are giving up 173, I think, yards per game to the running back position. Like, of course, it all lines up. You know, he's going to end up with 50 rushing yards or whatever, or something crazy like that. But of course, it's obviously a dream matchup.
He may be the most chalkiest play in DFS we've seen all year too, because yes. I don't know.
By the way, that was Matt Harmon and Kevin Steele just peeing in David Johnson owners' Cheerios right there.
I am a David Johnson owner, so I do not want to see that happen.
You're all excited.
Nobody wants to see it happen, but the fantasy football universe doesn't care what we want. It only cares about chaos.
That's the most true statement I think has ever been used on this show. Soundbite. So, speaking of that division, though, and the NFC South, there's an interesting little note on here because the Dallas Cowboys are 7-1. But this note says, are the Falcons the best team in the NFC? The 6-3 Falcons, by the way. Are they the best team in the NFC right now?
Well, so I'm obviously okay. I wrote that, so I don't know. Like, I've been very intrigued by them, and I mean, we've seen them go to Denver, to Seattle, and play very well. Obviously, they've had a few games where, you know, it hasn't been as great, but for the most part, they've been a pretty dominant team all year. And I've kind of waited. It's almost been like, for a lot of times, I've almost waited for the other shoe to drop. That, like, similar to what kind of happened last year, they got off to a hot start, and then they sort of just caved. This year, I've been waiting for that, and it just hasn't happened. Their running game has been, you know, elite. They've been able to get other options involved in the offense other than Julio Jones with Taylor Gabriel, Mohamed Sanu, and then, like I mentioned, the running backs. And then their defense has actually played better than I think some people will give them credit for, because I tend to hear a lot from a lot of, you know, other analysts, things like that. Oh, well, they're playing the Falcons this week. Get ready. And the Falcons have actually played, in my opinion, a little bit better, at least their defense, than what people have given them credit for. So, yes, the Cowboys are probably, at this point, the best team in the NFC, but I don't know how far off the Falcons are.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Dallas personally, just because I love the way that they make you play on their script. You know, like, they dictate the terms of the game, and if you're going to play ball with them, you've got to try to win on that slow-paced, you know, just tough slug of a game, and they limit the possession for the opposing offense. Their best defense is their keep-away offense, and I just love that style right now. I think Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott are both legit. I think they should stick with Dak going forward, and I really think that they are the best team, again, because they dictate the terms of the engagement to the opposition.
I secretly am hoping that Minnesota figures out a way to turn it around, but how crazy is it? Here we are at the halfway point, and when we were having this conversation at the quarter point, we were talking about the Eagles, right? We were talking about how bad the Cardinals were. We were talking about the Minnesota Vikings being 4-0 at that point. The Washington Redskins had won 3 or 4 straight at that point as well, and now none of those guys are even in the conversation just 4 games later. what the heck's going to happen in the next 4 games? I'm really excited to find out because we could see the tables turn yet again. The Falcons, by the way, 305 points scored this year. Second place is way behind. San Diego has 268, almost 50 points less.
Been tremendous. Absolutely.
They might get Tevin Coleman back soon, too. I mean, it's a hamstring injury, so who knows, right? We just talked about Doug Martin with that, but if they get Tevin Coleman back any time relatively soon, I don't see that offense stopping. Hey, guys, Russell Wilson and Seattle Seahawks seem to have woken up on Monday night. I don't know what happened. They were dug in, right? They just came out of the hole, took a little peek. They didn't see their shadow this time. So like, all right, I'll stay out here this time.
Talk about an unexpected turnaround. I mean, it was so hard. Like, how could you really talk anybody out of benching Russell Wilson in that spot or anybody else? I mean, I think their one issue right now is that their ground game is starting to kind of fall apart. I mean, Kristen Michael, I think, has been a very good success story this year. Somebody that's played well when they've needed him, but I think their offensive line needs to offer a little more. Their running game, their passing game especially has not been such a threat. So teams have been able to really stack the box against them and everything like that. But at the same time, right now I think this offense, like when it clicks, and we saw it really click last night, it's a dangerous offense because they have playmakers everywhere. They have Jimmy Graham in full form and just completely destroying. So I really hope that this is just the beginning of things for the Seattle offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think heading into this week, because I know me personally, like I didn't have Russell Wilson very high in my own personal rankings that I have, and I didn't really see this game being the type of game that it was. And I mean, I think you can make an argument this is one of the more exciting games that we've seen all season. I mean, there was certainly some just craziness with what happened at the end of the half and everything else, but overall, I mean, I think it was one of the more exciting games. But I mean, Russell Wilson finally actually looked like Russell Wilson that we expect, was able to move around the pocket, wasn't a sitting duck in the behind that horrible offensive line. Now all I'm really hoping for is Tyler Lockett to finally break out because
you and me both, buddy.
I've held on to him all year and just continue to wait. Just come on, let's make it happen.
Kev has held on to this guy like a baby with a bottle, man. We talk about it every single podcast. Kev's like, oh, who would you consider cut? And then we all say Tyler Lockett. He's like, nah, I ain't doing it.
The thing is, like, and I love Lockett coming into this year. I still believe he's a really good player. You saw when he had a couple of touches last night that he looked great. I mean, he's starting to look more like the explosive player now that he's getting farther and farther away from that PCL injury. But the problem is, like at best, he's a third option on a team that wants to establish a ground game. I mean, they are a pass-first team now, but they want to still have their running backs involved. At best, he's a third option there behind a resurgent Jimmy Graham and Doug Baldwin as the kind of consistent slot receiver. So, like, you know, I love Tyler Lockett. I think there's going to be explosive weeks, but really what are we holding out for at this point? I don't think you can view it in the same way as what I and some other people did coming into the year.
Hey,
whoops.
Whoops. None of us are 100%. Let's just get that out of the way right now. That's for damn sure.
It's very true.
Tyler Lockett did almost have a punt return for a touchdown, so he almost had something for you this week.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's where we're at. But hey, I'll just be the guy in the room with on fire, and everything's okay. Everything is okay.
This is fine.
Yeah.
This is fine.
The Seahawks, by the way, quietly 5-2-1. Actually, a better record percentage-wise than the Falcons right now. Didn't see that one coming. At least not from how they looked when they first started playing. I should probably clarify that a little bit. That'll do it, guys, for the news heading into Week 10. Lots of stuff happening in Week 9, including that Monday night debacle with the referees. Watching Blandino try to explain that today, it was just absolutely hysterical. There was nothing he could say that would make anybody happy about the situation. He pretty much was just like, yeah, we messed up. That was stupid, but whatever. Moving on. Buffalo loses it to Seattle, and now they head up to Week 10 to face Who does Buffalo face in Week 10? A bye.
Yeah, I think they're on bye, yeah.
They face nobody. So Rex Ryan's going to get himself a win. So let's get into some streaming options here for Week 10, guys. It's going to be more important than ever to have at least some of these guys hit because between bye weeks and injuries, I'm sure some teams are hurting out there. By the way, this week, the Bills, Lions, Colts, Raiders all on a bye. So some big fantasy players not playing this week. To start off with the quarterback position, Kev, we'll start with you. Who is your streaming quarterback of the week?
There's quite a few I could go with, and I really hate myself for even saying this, but I really, it's kind of hard to get it out of your mouth, but I really like Jay Cutler this week. It's hard to really endorse Jay Cutler, but I mean, they play against Tampa Bay this weekend. They allow the fourth most points to fantasy quarterbacks, giving up over 20 points a game. So, as I don't love it, I do think that he will be viable, and I think he could end up being a borderline QB1.
I like it, man. I'm in on Jay Cutler this week. I wrote him up as the top spot start quarterback for the week. I think the Tampa Bay defense, man, they've allowed over 850 yards the last 2 weeks alone. It's crazy. So I'm with you there. For me, my guy, I think, is Joe Flacco this week, which is gross because Joe Flacco has not been good this year. I mean, this is the nature of streaming quarterbacks. I mean, for God's sakes, we were talking about Ryan Tannehill's streamer last week, which didn't work out predictably. Joe Flacco. This is a really good stat from J.J. Zacharyson that he passed along. No quarterback in NFL history has thrown for over 4,000 yards and not hit 17 touchdowns, but that's exactly what Joe Flacco is on pace to do. And, I think you can make a really easy mathematical regression argument that Joe Flacco just at some point has to have an eruption sort of touchdown game. And I think that certainly Cleveland on Thursday night presents a great opportunity to do so. They've been a terrible defense. They pretty much are playing like some exhibition talent. I believe they've only allowed one quarterback to not throw for multiple touchdowns, and that was Ryan Fitzpatrick, who we also know is hashtag bad. So yeah, I think that Flacco is a great play on Thursday night. You get to watch it go terribly, terribly wrong on primetime television. So there you go. What more can you want?
What a game. I mean, last Thursday we had Falcons-Bucks just scoring up and down the field all day. It was a terrific game to watch. This week we get Cleveland and Baltimore. Woohoo! Wouldn't it be such a Jay Cutler thing to do to beat Minnesota's defense 20-10 and then lay an egg versus Tampa Bay?
It would be something, that's for sure.
Just the fantasy universe telling us, hey, you guys suck. Who else do we have on this list here? I'm not going to mention another Chief, even though he's probably the best one left here because, why not? Actually, I'm going to. Alex Smith versus Carolina is probably the best matchup left on the board here. I see there's Carson Wentz versus Atlanta, Case Keenum versus the Jets. I couldn't myself queue up either of those options. If you're in a super deep league, I guess that's an option for you. But Alex Smith coming back, clear concussion protocol versus Carolina is just anemic secondary there with 3 or 4 rookie cornerbacks. I like Smith to come in and have a decent performance if you need him. I say decent because I think sometimes people expect that we're saying these guys are going to score 30 points. I'm not expecting that out of Alex Smith.
I mean, you should have. I mean, he's pretty much consistent for 16 fantasy points a week. That's pretty much what he's going to give you. So.
Yeah, if you have a stacked roster and you just need the quarterback to score something, go with Alex Smith. Or Ryan Tannehill if you want. Tannehill, so let's not get into it. My boy Tanny, I got his jersey still. I'm still going to wear it proud. By the way, since I stopped wearing that jersey, we've won 3 straight, so I'm not putting that damn thing on the rest of the season. It's staying in the closet.
There you go. Stick with the trends, man.
That's it.
Stick with what's working.
It was a curse is what it was. How many people benched Jay Ajayi last week, by the way?
Oh, hopefully nobody. If they did, shame on them. They deserve what they got.
Yeah, guy in my league benched him. I laughed. He still won by 0.12, by the way.
See, there's no justice in this world.
No justice at all. How about tight ends, guys? There's quite a few tight ends on here. Tight end position has had a resurgence lately. We saw Austin Hooper blow it up last Thursday night. Who do we expect to blow it up this week?
I talked about Joe Flacco, and I think as an extension, I think Dennis Pitta, it's hard to get away from it's hard to go with Dennis Pitta after hyping him last week, hyping him earlier in the season. He's yet to find the end zone, but at the same time, he's one of the top targeted tight ends in the NFL. Coming into last week, his targets per game ranked him in the top 5 among tight ends in the NFL. The Browns give up just oodles of yards to the tight end position. I don't know how else to say it. They give up over 80 yards per game. Jason Witten went for 130 yards, and he can barely run. So, come on. I would think that Pitta, if somebody's going to help that regression argument in the touchdown department for Joe Flacco, I think it's going to be a little bit of positive regression from Dennis Pitta, who is yet to score this year. He hasn't scored in, I think, over 2 years. So I don't want to say he's due, but at the same time, if somebody's going to help him along, it would be the Cleveland Browns.
Jason Witten. Get that guy a wheelchair. He'll still probably get 130 yards.
Seriously. Well, he'll still make those contested catches.
They'll all be contested at that point. He'll be as tall as some of the running backs out there. Oh, man. I tell you what, man, Lance Kendricks has been a pretty solid option lately, so I'm thinking, why not keep going with him? Why not keep riding that train until he proves to you that he can't handle it anymore? I started him last week in a PPR league to a cool 11, 12 points, something like that. Or actually, no, 16 in the PPR. I apologize. 16 points from a Lance Kendricks spot start because Zach Miller was on a bye. Really enjoyed that. This week he gets a Jets defense that really can't stop much of anything through the air as of late. Really good run defense, so the Rams will be forced to pass. I like Kendricks again this week. Kev is still deciding. There's a bunch of names here. Kev, you want me to read them to you?
No, I was trying to bring some. That's what happens. You don't come prepared, and then you try to rush the last second. Anyway, I think I feel like it's a little cherry picking, but I'm gonna go with CJ Fedorowicz. I think that especially over the last 4 weeks, he has been absolute gold in terms of the tight end position, which you should probably use that term loosely because the tight end position has been awful this year. However, over the his last 4 games played, he does come in as the number 3 scoring tight end with 20 receptions, 224 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And I believe he's second or third in targets as well among all tight ends. So he's getting that workload. We know Brock Osweiler is terrible. He's going to continue to pepper Fedorowicz with targets because he just can't get the ball down the field, and he's turned into his ultimate safety blanket. So on a weekly basis, I'm surprised that Fedorowicz is still as available as he is in most leagues and should be a guy who on most weeks should be viewed as a tight end 1.
Can you believe that? A Houston Texans tight end. CJ Fedorowicz. I feel like we've been waiting for that guy to do something for a while. He's finally doing it. He's doing it this year because Brock Osweiler can't get the ball to anybody else. Jesus. The Oracle of Brock. Who do they play this week? Houston against Jacksonville. Jacksonville. Got some defensive options. I see a few interesting matchups here. I see the Rams on here again. People love that Rams-Jets matchup.
Yeah, if you got the Jets defense, man, I think that's the way to go, right? Especially because they were a popular ad last week against the Dolphins that didn't really work out as much. But, it's Case Keenum. What more needs to be said than it's Case Keenum?
The Jets and the Rams offenses both – they give up 1 and 2 as far as most points to opposing DSTs. So, you can just play either one of them. It's going to apparently be a matchup. It's going to be a matchup of DSTs.
Especially if you start the Rams and Ryan Fitzpatrick can't go this week. You're looking at Bryce Petty starting, so could be like a 3-0 game. Maybe 2-0 with the safety.
5-2 final score.
Oof.
Gosh.
No, thank you.
It'll end up being like this 43-35 Chargers-Titans matchup last week. That's what we'll end up having because we expect it to be low scoring.
Oh, yeah. Brian Quick, 150 yards.
Oh,
Book it. Right. He's got a big game coming, though, by the way. I thought it was going to be last week, but Brian Quick very well could be a big week this week. You never know.
Me too. I was high on him last week as well. Man, he had the targets going into this week. I thought for sure they were just going to keep feeding him the ball.
Well, Keenum missed him on a couple of deep shots, again, because he's Case Keenum.
He's Case Keenum. Poor Case Keenum. Screw Case Keenum. He was playing Carolina. He couldn't put up more than 10 points. Jesus. How about the Rams defense, though? They got it. I mean, they've held some good offenses to low-scoring games this year. I mean, if that team actually had an offense, they might be able to make something out of themselves here. You know, Jeff Fisher might be able to avoid the 7-9 curse.
Well, if only they had made some sort of move to get a good quarterback. If only they had done that, you know.
Jared Goff, he's just sitting there wasting away. You just see his expression on the sideline. Poor kid. He's like, I don't care. I still get paid.
It's never a good sign.
Jared Goff, he's going to be the next Jay Cutler as far as facial expressions because he never looks like he gives a crap about anything when he just the camera pans to him. He's just got this such a I don't care face to him.
Well, listen, man, he's a handsome dude from Southern California. And you know he's in his home, in his own stomping grounds. So I mean, listen, what do you got to worry about when you're in that position, right? I mean, you got plenty else going for you. If this football thing's not going to work out, you got plenty of other things to do out here in Los Angeles, and especially when you're that handsome.
Pull himself a Matt Leinart out there. Gosh, I can't remember that. We could talk all day about these quarterbacks who just kind of came into the league and let stardom take over. That'll do it, guys, for the streaming options for this week. We mentioned more, actually, than we normally do, so hopefully that helps you out going into Week 10. There are some good matchups to take advantage of, especially with guys who are probably on your waivers. So just go take a look, especially that LA-New York Jets game. That's a good one to target if you need a streaming option for this week. How about guys who probably aren't going to get picked up in waivers this week? They're owned in less than 20% of ESPN or Yahoo leagues. This is our best of the rest, our post-waivers options for you to target. Matt, you didn't write one down here, so I'm hoping you have one.
Oh, yeah.
But let's start with you.
I'm just very professional and very prepared and wrote an answer down like I was supposed to. Of course. But I actually think my guy is somebody that we kind of touched on earlier, and he's not a guy that's going to be usable for you, but I think he's somebody that is a priority grab right now, and that's Kenneth Farrow of the San Diego Chargers, and we don't know who he is really. He's an undrafted rookie free agent, but we talked about Melvin Gordon and all that volume. If God forbid, Melvin Gordon were to get hurt, Kenneth Farrow looks like the next man up. I mean, with Dexter McCluster now out of the picture, Danny Woodhead obviously has been out for the season for a long time now. Kenneth Farrow looks like that next guy up, and it's all about that volume. If something happens to Melvin Gordon, I think Kenneth Farrow steps into a big feature role in an offense that knows how to move the football down the field. So he'll be in scoring position. He'll get a ton of volume. And really, I think the focus right now, especially if you're one of these contending teams in the fantasy playoffs, looking more towards is not necessarily bench depth. You should be looking for upside stashes, and I think Kenneth Farrow seems like a guy that nobody else is going to be on, but could be a difference. I mean, ironically, you add him and hope he never does anything because we want to see Melvin Gordon continue to have the success that he's had this year. But if something happens, I think Farrow is the guy to own there.
Yeah, really good point.
I 100% agree. I think I talked about him a couple weeks ago as well. I really like Kenneth Farrow and what he has to bring to the table there in that offense. And like you mentioned, if something happens to him, and this is really kind of the key. I know we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is kind of the key time now, in my opinion, when you should start targeting those handcuffs in case, shit happens. Because especially with, trading deadline passing, so if something were to happen and you can't even go out and make a move that way, I think it's a smart move to start stockpiling that talent. But for me, another guy actually that we just sort of talked about for me, and I was actually shocked to find out that he's still available in over 90% of Yahoo leagues, and that is Brian Quick. he continues to see a decent target share on a weekly basis, and nobody's kind of paying attention. And I know he plays for the Rams, and there's Case Keenum's the quarterback, but he is on pace for 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. In PPR leagues, he has 4 double-digit fantasy weeks already. I'm just sort of surprised that he hasn't gained more traction among fantasy owners, because I do think that he's worth a bench spot. And especially these last couple of weeks with so many teams on bye, and then even this week with 4 more teams on bye, he's not a bad option in certain matchups to maybe be a wide receiver 4 because of the target share that he does receive. And then, like I mentioned, I mean, he's been relatively productive so far, but just sort of everyone just kind of lets him hang out on the waiver wire.
I think that's a similar situation. One, the quarterback situation, right? Not a great quarterback situation there in LA, but also that's another musical chairs at wide receiver situation where Kenny Britt performs well one week, Brian Quick the next week. Tavon Austin had a good week in there somewhere. I honestly prefer Brian Quick as well. I think that's a great call out, but I could definitely see why he's still so readily available. I'm going to go with another kind of upside guy here. Like Matt was talking about, get prepared for your fantasy playoffs. Get those guys that nobody's really targeting yet but could become a key piece going forward. I'm looking at Bryce Treggs, I think is how you pronounce it, the Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver. This is
when you know you're getting deep, when you have to add the caveat. What's how do you pronounce his name? So I like it. I like where your head's at. This is good.
Getting really deep here because you're right. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name, but he came in his first game this week after they cut Michael Huff. After they cut Josh Huff, Michael Huff actually was a player too, by the way. After they cut Josh Huff because of his legal issues, he came in. He gets 4 targets, 2 catches, 69 yards. Nothing special, but he is a deep threat that Philadelphia desperately needs. Dorial Green-Beckham, Nelson Aguilar have had flashes of brilliance here and there, but overall they've kind of struggled a bit. So I think Treggs could be a guy that develops into maybe the Mike Wallace role here in Philadelphia, somebody that just kind of keeps the defense honest and gets that, that deep touchdown every once in a while for you. Dun, 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 dun. All right. Where was I going to go from there? Oh, fantasy playoffs prep. Okay. I was not prepared to roll into the next topic. That's bad on me. I apologize. Oh, gosh. And speaking of the getting prepared for your fantasy playoffs, guys, we have a few topics here that we kind of want to get through. Not get through, but we want to cover. We want to help people get ready. We mentioned it several times already throughout the show. There's only a few weeks left, and it may seem like a lot. 4 or 5 weeks may seem like a lot. But as we just talked about before with the NFL, how, Minnesota's now not being talked about as a contender and so on and so forth. The same thing can happen in your fantasy league. If you lose the next 4 weeks, you could miss the playoffs no matter how good your record is right now. If you're 9-0 right now and you end up 9-4, you never know what's going to happen. You definitely don't want to go into the playoffs on a lousy streak either, right? You don't want to go in on a losing streak. That's never good. Go in hot. Always got to be hot. So who are some fantasy players that people should be targeting via trade? We said trade deadline's coming up shortly, right? Over the next couple of weeks. I think November 17th may be the Yahoo default deadline there. So there's less than 10 days to get a trade worked out. Who are some people that you guys are targeting or fantasy players should be targeting to lead them to fantasy glory here come playoff time?
All right, well, I guess I'll go ahead and jump in here. So one guy that I really do like is Tyrell Williams. I think he's a guy that you can probably get on the relatively cheap. I don't think it's going to take a ton to acquire him. And if you look at their last 3 weeks of the season, it is absolutely delicious as they get to face the Panthers, Raiders, and Browns over the last 3 weeks of the season. As of right now, he's wide receiver 24, 520 yards and 2 touchdowns. And, I think he's really emerged, in my opinion, as probably his Phillip Rivers' go-to target in that offense. And for me, like I said, he's a guy that I think that you're not going to have to pay that premium price for, like if you're hurting out wide receivers. So you're not going to have to pay the, wide receiver 1 type of ransom that you're going to have to pay to acquire a solid wide receiver. And I think Tyrell Williams can definitely even improve upon where he stands right now and can end up as a high-end wide receiver too.
Yeah, that was going to be my guy, so I'm glad I let you go first. But I think that Tyrell Williams is a great call. They got a great schedule down the stretch too. They play Cleveland, they play Tampa Bay, they play Carolina. A lot of weak secondaries in there in the meat of the fantasy playoffs. So that's a really good call. A guy I would be trying to buy right now is Stephon Diggs, and I think because he's shown a bit more of his floor lately than his ceiling, and maybe that is what we're going to see from him for the rest of the season. Is more of a floor play than a ceiling play because of that Vikings offensive line. But I think the way you saw him get like double-digit catches but not hit 90 yards, I think we're going to have some of those games in there. But we know he's a baller. He's a dynamic talent. So I think with that safe floor, because he just owns such a dominant share of the team targets and the team air yards, that I think we'll see him be a very safe play going forward, but he also has a really good weekly ceiling.
Absolutely. Tyrell Williams was also a guy I was going to talk about. It seems we were all on the same exact page with that one. Good job by Kev to just go ahead and steal it.
I was just trying to snipe you guys. I had to be quick.
You certainly were. And so, a team I like, a whole team, because I like to do that, Kev. I like to steal whole teams. Atlanta has a fantastic playoff schedule, by the way. So if you can get Atlanta players, I think you're probably in pretty good shape. If you have somebody who, for whatever reason, still doesn't think Matt Ryan could continue his success the entire season, I don't know why they would think that. He's been absolutely balling out. They face the Rams, 49ers, Panthers, 14, 15, 16. That is a hell of a schedule. Maybe you can get yourself some Tevin Coleman. He's been injured. Owners may be looking to unload him. So I think Falcons players should be on your radar. Looking at, you're probably not going to be able to get a Julio, so maybe Mohamed Sanu, maybe look at a Taylor Gabriel, Tevin Coleman, like I just mentioned. I think their 14, 15, 16 schedule is probably among the best in the league.
Yeah, I think, as I should say this starting off, is it wouldn't be a TFA podcast if I didn't talk about a Kansas City Chief. So for me, I think that one player that I would target would be Spencer Ware coming off the concussion. A little bit of recency bias there with him, but he has been a beast this year, a little quietly, to be honest with you. But I think we saw last week Charkandrick West was something I talked about on our Sunday show that we did, that I didn't think that he was going to be that great. He was very chalky in DFS. People were all over him, calling him Charkandrick West last week, and I just wasn't on it. I've never been overly impressed with his talent. I think he's a average running back. I don't think he's somebody that you consider elite. I've always felt like Spencer Ware was a much better option, and he's really proved it this year. And as of right now, there's a good chance that he returns this week to face Carolina. But then if you look at their schedule down the stretch, Kansas City has one of the best schedules to finish out the season as well, getting to play Carolina, which should be a little tough. But past that, you have Tampa Bay, Denver, who has really shown some cracks in that defense that you can run upon them, and then Atlanta, Oakland, Tennessee, and then Denver again at home. So I really like that schedule moving forward. I think Spencer Ware is clearly the man to own in that offense. Jamal Charles isn't coming back. There's reports that he could come back week 17, but that doesn't really matter for fantasy playoffs unless you're one of those weirdos who plays week 17 in fantasy. So for me, I really like Spencer Ware, and I think you could get him at a discounted rate at this point.
I like that. I like to buy me some Spencer Ware. I actually own him in a few spots, so I'm enjoying that. He could probably get, like you mentioned, he could probably be had pretty easily from players who are just tired of the Chiefs' backfield situation going on there. Maybe looking to unload for somebody who may be a little more consistent, albeit not as talented. Matt, anybody else you're looking at here to target for your playoff push?
Yeah, I think any player that you can kind of get. I like the idea there, of Spencer Ware. See if that name value is not really caught up to what he's done yet. Maybe there's some other guys like Terrence West or even as high as Jay Ajayi that maybe their owners aren't buying in. Maybe you trade a more established player. If you guys had Todd Gurley, would you flip him right now for Jay Ajayi? Because I definitely would. And if you play in a league where people aren't, are just more into big names, that's something you could at least do. Or, again, maybe throw a little extra on there to try to buy Jay Ajayi. Sometimes it's not about buying low. It's about buying high and buying at the right time. And I think that could be a situation we have here with a player like Ajayi. And another guy that I would bring up is Randall Cobb if his owners are frustrated after the hit or miss sort of thing that we saw with his playing time last week. But he was getting so heavily used there before he went out with the hamstring injury the week prior to last. So I think he's a guy that definitely this is a time to buy as well.
Yeah, good call there, I think, with the Ajayi thing, because if you look at his schedule just purely from like a top-down level, it doesn't look great, right? Arizona, Jets, Buffalo. But keep in mind, he just put up 28 points against Buffalo and 20 points against the Jets his last 2 games. So he can run on those 2 teams, and, why not bank on it, especially with the way Gurley's been going.
Volume.
Exactly. Well, that too. I'm a big quarterback guy, as you guys probably know, so I'd be remiss not to mention some more quarterbacks here. Phillip Rivers faces Carolina, Oakland, Cleveland, and Jameis Winston, New Orleans, Dallas, New Orleans. New Orleans twice for Jameis Winston in the playoffs. That is money right there. So how about handcuffs, though? A lot of running back injuries. We just talked about Spencer Ware. Throughout the show, we've talked about Tevin Coleman, who's also hurt, Doug Martin, who's also hurt. Are there handcuff running backs similar to a Kenneth Farrow, who Matt mentioned before, any other handcuff running backs that you're looking to stash, either anticipating an injury or just thinking to yourself, I want this guy if an injury does happen?
Yeah, so let's talk about a guy that nobody really likes to talk about. Alfred Blue, I think, is worth stashing. I mean, we know he's not that good. I even see him made a little face there. And that's understandable because he's not good at football, but that's fine. Again, it comes back to volume. We know the Texans want to run the ball. They've given Lamar Miller just a ton of touches, something he hasn't been used to in his career, and he's already cropped up on the injury report of late. So if Lamar Miller, again, were to go down at any point, I think Alfred Blue, people love to get caught up in the Paul Perkinses and the Kenneth Dixons of the world because of this unknown, mysterious upside. And that's fine. I totally understand that. But at the same time, some of these just old, crusty veterans, like a Tim Hightower last year, are the ones that are proven coaching staffs. Trust them. They somehow fall ass backwards, for lack of a better word, into a feature role there towards the end of the year. And sure enough, they win you fantasy titles. The Texans play the Colts, the Jaguars, and the Bengals, and then the Titans in the last 4 weeks of the NFL season. Those are all pretty solid spots that they can run on those teams. So, you hope it doesn't – again, you add him, you hope you never have to use him, but if the situation arises, he's on your roster when everyone's chasing him on waivers, it's one to look for.
Alfred Blue.
Never going to get anybody excited. I'm not like breaking any big barriers here, but you never know.
This is breaking news from Matt Harmon. Save Alfred Blue.
No, it's very good points, and the guy I sort of like, and I'm knocking on wood here because I really don't want to ever see this happen. But if anything happens to David Johnson, Andre Ellington for me would be another guy to make sure you have on your bench. We've seen him be relatively productive before in the past. Obviously, he lost his starting job. He's been injury prone. But as of right now, obviously, he's just chilling on the bench. But, back in 2012, he was RB19, rushed for 663 yards, 3 touchdowns. Obviously, very good pass catcher as well, so PPR viable. But he's kind of a guy that I've just kind of made sure I've had on all my rosters because David Johnson gets such a large workload that I feel like that Andre Ellington would see something similar to that. And if you don't want to lose, the GOAT and sit there with your hands, okay, stop. I got a little ahead of myself. And just not have anything there, to miss out on that because it happens far too often. Like last year we saw with Le'Veon Bell where just plenty of people have just kind of dropped D'Angelo Williams, didn't need him anymore. People went running to the waiver wire, and if you got him, then you were feeling great. Or like you mentioned, Tim Hightower as well. So Andre Ellington is a guy that I really like and somebody that I would at least depending on how much, how much space you had, I would definitely try to roster Andre Ellington.
Two solid options here. Guys, I am going to head down to Texas, similar to Matt Harmon, but I'm going to the other Texas team. I'm going over to Dallas, and I'm going with Alfred Morris. They rely on this running game so much with Ezekiel Elliott that if he goes down, they have to continue that in order to be successful. I'm not confident that Dak Prescott is ready to carry that team on his back yet, at least not with his arm. I know Darren McFadden is still there, I think. I haven't heard much out of him lately. But I think Alfred Morris would be the guy to turn to if something would happen. Again, like you guys mentioned, definitely not hoping that happens for Zeke owners out there. They're probably cursing all three of us because we are putting hexes on our running backs. But if Zeke were to go down, I would like to have me some Alfred Morris in a run offense that just runs the ball a ton. The only team I think in football that has run the ball more than they've passed this season. I'll take my chances. Is it a smart move to trade fantasy assets that have a brutal end-of-season schedule despite them being your superstars, your all-stars? Is there in any situation where you're trading all-star players with a tough end-of-season schedule?
I think it's very tough because we know that despite, so, for example, like I guess a good example, at least last year, was probably Julio Jones, who had some rough matchups at the end of the year. But there's no way I think I could ever fathom trading a Julio Jones unless I got comparable, unless you got like OBJ or something like that for him or AJ Green. You're probably not going to trade Julio Jones for a bunch of wide receiver twos or anything like that, despite what you may think about a schedule. Because, the hard part about trying to predict this is that you also are, it's a big gamble because plenty of things can happen in 4 weeks to a defense. They could suffer tons of injuries, things of that nature. And I think it's just too tough to try to play that game. So it would really depend on the player and what you were getting in return, because I just don't think it's ever smart to trade a guy who has the ceiling of, like I mentioned, Julio Jones or anybody like that. That's, because I just don't think you're going to be able to get what you're looking for. And at the same time, I would hate to be the guy that traded Julio Jones for a wide receiver 2 or 3 or whatever the case may be just because you were afraid of their schedule.
Yeah, I totally agree for the most part. Especially when the guys have really strong volume. Again, for running backs especially, it's hard for me to fathom, hypothetically speaking, if Le'Veon Bell or David Johnson had a tough end-of-season schedule to trade those guys away just because of that, because those touches can overcome anything. It just depends on, again, what it's a cop-out sort of answer, it feels like, but it really is, what are you going to get back in return? Are you going to get multiple guys that can help you? Are you going to get another superstar-level player? I want to head into the fantasy playoffs, the championship run, with a bunch of guys that can be trump cards on my roster. So I don't want to necessarily disseminate those players just because they have unfavorable schedules. Because, listen, we can't always give the edge to the defense. Sometimes these superstar level players do overcome those matchups, and they are the ones that win the day. And so it's a balancing act, and it's a case by case basis. But I almost always side on I want to keep my studs on my roster.
Yeah, I completely agree with you guys. I don't think there's anything more to say. You keep your studs for the most part. Unless you're getting blown away offers, right? Somebody I would probably give a blow away offer for right now would be Mike Evans. That guy's on fire.
Yes.
Great schedule the rest of the year. If you can get your hands on him, do it right away. All right, guys, we've given the listeners a ton of advice going into Week 10 already, and a lot of advice actually for the fantasy playoffs just coming a few short weeks away. What's one last word of advice you would give to guys who have been successful so far this year? They're doing it. Their team's in the top 3. They're looking like they're headed straight for the fantasy playoffs. What can they do to either keep the ball moving or even better their chances going into the playoffs?
I think the biggest thing is, don't overthink it, but also be flexible. You got here for a reason. You're probably pretty good or pretty lucky at this whole fantasy football thing. So whatever you did going into this, I think stick to it. Definitely be willing to move players, be willing to acquire different players going into it. So I don't know. I think we've given the listeners, the guys and gals out there listening, a ton of advice. I think take a compilation of this and decide what's best for your roster.
Oh yeah,
I 100% agree. I think and add Sammy Watkins because I am shocked at how widely available he is. I think many owners thought that he wasn't going to be back. He looks like he could be practicing as soon as I believe Friday is when he's eligible to return. He's shed the walking boot, and he could be that winning lottery ticket down the stretch.
I did not realize that. I'm going to go add that guy immediately across the board. Great call out there, Kev. The only other thing I would add, guys, like you said, Matt, we've given so much advice already, is to just keep on churning that roster. Never be satisfied with the bottom half of your roster, especially, if you just picked a guy up for a week and he had a really good week. That's not an obligation to keep him forever, especially if it's one of the lower end positions, at least to us, like a second quarterback, a second tight end, a second defense, God forbid. I hope you don't have a second defense. I'm always willing to get rid of those guys to add a high upside receiver or a high upside running back. It wasn't always the case for me. I'm sure Kevin is very proud that I just said that.
Yeah. And I do have one more question, I guess, for you, Matt. Adrian Peterson, would you roster him? Because, there's the rumor mill out there that he could return sometime in December. Is he somebody that you would add and use a roster spot on in the hope that if he does come back?
I think it pretty strictly depends on where are you in with the construction of your team. Do you have space for him? Like, I would not drop like a usable level player. But if maybe I had one or two of those high upside spots to stash players on, I would consider it. What is the harm? The real thing is, like, if Minnesota's rushing attack had taken off, if Jerick McKinnon had fulfilled some of the promise, had been healthy, I would say no, because what would be the rush to bring him back and fully reintegrate him? But if the Vikings are making a playoff push and Peterson's available, I think that there's pretty good reason to add him. But at the same time, let's not forget, he wasn't playing well before he got in there. That offensive line is worse now than it was then. So I don't really know what we're expecting, but I think it's worth adding if you have the space.
All right, so there you go. Sammy Watkins, Adrian Peterson, two injured guys that could be coming back. That's a good, actually, last-minute bit there to throw in. Look for guys who, were hurt and may be coming back off of that IR designation. Don't forget that does exist. If you're on IR, that doesn't necessarily mean you are done for the year. All right, I wanted to give a huge shout-out and a special thanks to our guest, Matt Harmon, once again for joining us. Matt, thank you so much for, warming up with Total Access before you joined, the more important show here, obviously, with the Fantasy Authority podcast.
Absolutely.
We'll reach out to you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a good little practice there on the network, whatever, that's fine. But this was the real show, and we really dug into some stuff here. So absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. If you guys want to follow me, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at @MattHarmon_BYB. You can find all my scribblings of words at NFL.com/Harmon. And you can see me with your own two eyes on Fantasy and Friends every week at 6 p.m. Eastern, doing the Fantasy Hipsters bit on Tuesdays with my coworker Matt Franciscovich. And you can also see me on a bunch of different places. Hey, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll figure it out.
Oh, what a good company man there, Matt Harmon. And what a good self-promoter, man. Once again, thank you so much. We really do appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to come on here with the Fantasy Authority podcast. One of the nicest guys you'll ever talk to, one of the most humble guys you'll ever talk to. So reach out to him on Twitter anytime. He'll get back to you, I promise. Now you have to get back to him. So
I'll do my best. I don't want to make any promises I can't keep.
I'm promising for you. I'm promising for you. Oh, gosh. All right, guys, it's been fun. That's all the time we have for today, though. If you enjoyed the show, show us some love on Twitter at FF_authority and check out thefantasyauthority.com. Lots of articles every single week for your viewing and for your viewing pleasure and to help out your fantasy teams as the season goes on. It's going too fast, so make sure, you're paying attention and getting that team ready to go. We also do our game day show each and every single Sunday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, right up till kickoff, where we answer your fantasy questions for the week live on YouTube. It's a great show. It's a lot of fun. Last week we had Fantasy Authority writer Ryan Williams on, as well as guest Ben Cummins. It was a lot of fun. We answered questions all day. You guys threw them at us hard. We really look forward to doing that again. Also, please rate, subscribe, review on iTunes and Stitcher. That helps us out a ton. That'll do it for Kevin Steele and Matt Harmon. I'm Anthony Pinzone. This has been another episode of the Fantasy Authority Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and have an awesome night, everyone.